The stolen stealth ship shuddered under enemy fire as Nancy Foster pushed the engines beyond their safety limits, trying to escape the Krellian home fleet. Morrison watched dozens of alien warships closing in around them while Dr. Chang worked desperately to transmit the stolen intelligence data to Admiral Sullivan's forces before their communication systems were destroyed. "Transmission complete," Dr. Chang announced, just as a Krellian plasma beam tore through their port engine. "Sullivan has everything we downloaded from the War Archive, including the complete plans for Operation Final Silence." Morrison felt the ship spinning out of control as more enemy weapons found their target. Through the viewports, he could see the surface of a barren moon rushing up to meet them as Nancy Foster struggled to regain control of their damaged vessel. "Brace for impact," Foster called out seconds before they crashed into the rocky landscape. In a shower of sparks and twisted metal, Morrison dragged himself from the wreckage and found Dr. Chang unconscious but breathing, while Nancy Foster had been killed instantly when a piece of debris pierced the cockpit. The ship's communication systems were completely destroyed, and they were stranded on the moon's surface with no way to call for help. Within hours, the entire Krellian home fleet would be searching every piece of rock in the system. War Prime Zethkar's personal command ship landed near the crash site just as Morrison was pulling Dr. Chang to safety behind some ancient stone ruins left by a long-dead civilization. The alien commander emerged from his vessel with a full battalion of elite warriors wearing heavy combat armor and carrying the most advanced weapons the Krellian Empire could produce. "Human Morrison?" Zethkar's voice echoed across the barren landscape through his suit's external speakers. "Your escape from captivity has caused considerable damage to our operations, but your interference ends here. Surrender now, and your death will be quick and clean." Morrison helped Dr. Chang find cover among the alien ruins while checking his remaining weapons and ammunition. They had 2 plasma rifles taken from defeated guards and enough power cells for maybe an hour of fighting. Against a full battalion of elite Krellian troops, their chances of survival were essentially zero, but Morrison had no intention of surrendering after coming this far. "Jake," Dr. Chang whispered weakly as she regained consciousness and saw the enemy forces surrounding their position. "The intelligence we transmitted showed that Operation Final Silence targets every remaining human colony. Did we get the data to them in time to stop it?" Morrison looked up at the stars where he knew Admiral Sullivan's fleet was receiving the stolen information and coordinating humanity's response. "We did everything we could, Lisa. Now it's up to the resistance networks we helped build to use what we learned." The battle began when Krellian soldiers advanced through the ruins trying to flush out the 2 humans from their defensive positions. Morrison used every tactical trick he had learned during months of captivity and guerrilla warfare. He knew how the aliens moved and thought, and he used this knowledge to predict their actions and stay one step ahead of their assault teams. Dr. Chang provided technical support by using her modified scanner to detect enemy positions, while Morrison moved through the ruins picking off isolated soldiers with precisely aimed shots. The ancient stone structures provided excellent cover, and the narrow passages between them limited how many enemies could attack at once, but slowly the superior numbers and firepower of the Krellian battalion began to tell. Morrison's ammunition ran low while more enemy reinforcements arrived from the orbiting fleet. Dr. Chang was wounded again when debris from an explosion caught her in the shoulder, and Morrison realized they were fighting a battle they could not possibly win. News of the intelligence transmission spread through the human resistance networks faster than Krellian commanders could respond. Admiral Sullivan used the stolen data to coordinate massive simultaneous strikes against the hidden weapon platforms before Operation Final Silence could be launched. Human cells across the galaxy attacked key installations, while neutral alien species finally joined the rebellion after learning about the Krellian plans for galactic domination on worlds throughout the occupied territories. Conquered peoples rose up against their oppressors, inspired by the example of human resistance. The Yuthtar sabotaged Krellian industrial facilities while other client species provided intelligence about enemy military movements. The carefully planned operation to eliminate humanity had instead triggered a galaxy-wide revolution against the Empire. War-Prime Zethkar received reports of these disasters while personally leading the final assault against Morrison's position in the ancient ruins. Decades of Krellian expansion were being undone in a matter of hours as their client species turned against them, and their military resources were spread too thin to maintain control. "Your sacrifice means nothing human," Zethkar called out as his troops closed in on Morrison's last defensive position. "We will rebuild our forces and crush this rebellion just as we have crushed all others." Morrison emerged from cover for the final confrontation knowing that Dr. Chang was too badly wounded to continue fighting. His cybernetic enhancements allowed him to match the alien commander's strength and speed while his understanding of Krellian psychology gave him insights into his opponent's tactics and weaknesses. The battle between Morrison and Zethkar raged through the ruins as both warriors used every skill they possessed in mortal combat. Morrison's human adaptability and refusal to accept defeat gradually wore down the alien commander's confidence and tactical precision. For the first time in his military career, Zethkar began to understand what it meant to face an enemy who simply would not surrender no matter how hopeless the situation became. Both fighters were mortally wounded when Admiral Sullivan's rescue fleet finally arrived and drove off the remaining Krellian forces. Morrison lived just long enough to see human ships landing on the moon's surface and to know that his sacrifice had not been in vain. The intelligence they had stolen from Zethmur Prime allowed the Resistance to prevent Operation Final Silence and turn the tide of the galactic war. Zethkar died realizing that humans could not be conquered because they refused to accept that conquest was possible. Their willingness to fight impossible battles and make ultimate sacrifices had inspired other species to remember what freedom meant and to fight for it regardless of the cost. The Krellian Empire fragmented under pressure from multiple rebellions, while humanity emerged as the catalyst for a new galactic coalition based on cooperation rather than domination. Morrison's story spread among the stars, inspiring countless others to resist tyranny and never surrender their hope for a better future. A simple monument on New Earth bore the inscription that captured the essence of what Morrison had accomplished. "To the one human who refused to die and in refusing taught us all how to live." Morrison crouched in the shadows of a massive Krellian building watching alien patrols move through the streets of their capital city. 3 hours had passed since Nancy Foster successfully landed their stealth ship in an abandoned industrial district on the outskirts of Zethmur Prime. The pilot was now waiting at the extraction point while Morrison and Dr. Chang made their way toward the Central War Archive. In the heart of the city, the Krellian capital was unlike anything Morrison had ever seen. Towering spires of black metal stretched toward the sky while bridges of crystalline material connected buildings hundreds of meters above the ground. Millions of aliens moved through the streets in organized patterns that reminded Morrison of insects following predetermined paths. The air smelled of ozone and industrial chemicals that made his cybernetic breathing systems work harder to filter out toxins. Dr. Chang activated her portable scanner and whispered into Morrison's communication device. "The Central War Archive is 2 kilometers ahead in the government district. I'm reading massive security barriers around the building, including energy shields and automated defense systems. We'll need help from our Yithtar contacts to get inside." Morrison checked his watch and realized they were running behind schedule. The stealth ship's camouflage would fail in 3 hours, and after that point Nancy Foster would be completely vulnerable to Krellian sensors. They had to complete their mission and reach the extraction point before their cover was blown. Moving carefully through side streets and maintenance tunnels, Morrison and Dr. Chang avoided the main patrol routes while heading toward their meeting point with the Yithtar resistance fighters. These aliens had been conquered by the Krellians 40 years earlier and forced to work as servants and laborers in the capital city. Their underground network had been secretly helping other resistance movements for decades. The meeting took place in the basement of an abandoned factory where a Yithtar named Kestra waited with 3 other members of his species. They were shorter than humans with blue-gray skin and large eyes that glowed softly in the darkness. Kestra spoke in broken English through a translation device similar to the ones the Krellians used. "Human Morrison," Kestra said while studying. Morrison's cybernetic modifications with obvious curiosity. "We have heard stories of your escape from Krellian captivity. Your resistance inspires hope among the conquered peoples. We will help you reach the war archive, but the risks are very great." Morrison quickly explained what they needed to accomplish while Dr. Chang showed the aliens her computer infiltration equipment. The Ythtar had spent decades learning Krellian security procedures, and they knew about service tunnels that led directly under the government buildings. They could get the humans inside, but after that, Morrison and Dr. Chang would be on their own. The infiltration began just after midnight, when Krellian security patrols were at their lightest levels. Kestra led them through a maze of underground passages that had been built during the original construction of the capital city. The tunnels were filled with pipes and cables that carried power and information to the buildings above, while mechanical systems hummed constantly in the background. "The War Archive has 3 security levels," Kestra explained as they climbed through a vertical shaft toward the government district. "Physical barriers that can be bypassed with the right access, codes, electronic systems that monitor all computer activity in the building, and biological scanners that identify every individual who enters or leaves the facility." Dr. Chang had prepared for all 3 security types during their mission planning. She carried forged access cards created from captured Krellian technology, along with computer viruses designed to confuse their monitoring systems. The biological scanners would be the biggest challenge since they were programmed to detect any non-Krellian life forms in the building. Morrison realized they would need a distraction to draw security attention away from the War Archive while they completed their data download. He contacted the other Ythtar resistance cells through Kestra's communication network and asked them to create diversions throughout the capital city. Small explosions and power outages began occurring across different districts as the aliens carried out coordinated sabotage operations. The Central War Archive building was a massive pyramid of black stone that rose 50 stories above the surrounding government complex. Energy shields flickered around its perimeter while automated weapon platforms tracked any movement in the nearby streets. Morrison and Dr. Chang approached through the service tunnels while Krellian security forces responded to the diversionary attacks happening elsewhere in the city. Dr. Chang's access codes worked perfectly on the first 2 security barriers, but the biological scanners detected their human genetic signatures immediately. Alarms began sounding throughout the building as automated systems tried to locate the intruders, while security forces rushed back from the diversion sites to protect their most important military facility. "We have maybe 10 minutes before they seal the building completely," Dr. Chang said as she connected her equipment to the main computer terminal in the War Archive central chamber. The room was filled with massive data storage units that contained information about every military operation the Krellian Empire had ever conducted. Morrison stood guard at the chamber entrance while Dr. Chang worked frantically to download the files they needed. Her computer viruses had temporarily confused the building's internal security, but she could hear Krellian soldiers moving through the corridors, getting closer to their location with each passing minute. The download finally completed just as the first enemy troops reached the War Archive chamber. Morrison saw what they were looking for in the stolen files. Operation Final Silence involved massive weapons platforms, hidden in deep space that could destroy entire planets from long range. The operation was scheduled to begin in 72 hours with attacks on all remaining human colonies happening simultaneously. Morrison and Dr. Chang fought their way out of the building using weapons they had taken from defeated Krellian guards. The alien soldiers were well trained, but they had never faced humans who understood their tactics and equipment so thoroughly. Morrison's cybernetic enhancements allowed him to move faster and hit harder than normal humans, while Dr. Chang used her technical knowledge to turn the building's own systems against their operators. They reached the extraction point just as their stealth ship's camouflage finally failed and Nancy Foster became visible to Krellian sensors. The pilot was already starting the engines when Morrison and Dr. Chang jumped aboard while enemy Aircraft converged on their position from all directions. "Did you get what we came for?" Foster asked as she pushed the ship's engines to maximum power and headed for space as fast as possible. Morrison transmitted the stolen intelligence to Admiral Sullivan's fleet while Krellian fighters pursued them through the planet's atmosphere. "We got it all, Nancy. Now we just have to survive long enough to use it." Morrison stood in the underground command center on Kepler 442b, watching tactical displays that showed human resistance activity across 12 different star systems. The scattered guerrilla cells had evolved into something much more dangerous over the past 3 months. Using his knowledge of Krellian communication protocols, Morrison had helped coordinate simultaneous strikes that were causing serious problems for the alien occupation forces. Commander Rivera entered the command center, carrying reports from their latest intelligence-gathering mission. Jake, the weapon depot raid on Proxima Station was a complete success. Captain Ben Clark's team captured enough Krellian plasma rifles to arm 2 more resistance cells. They also downloaded the station's computer files before destroying the facility. Morrison nodded while studying the tactical information flowing in from other resistance groups. Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez had successfully infiltrated a Krellian administrative center on Volf 359 using stolen identity chips that Dr. Chang had modified. The intelligence she gathered revealed troop movements and supply routes that other cells could exploit in future attacks. "The Krellians are starting to adapt to our new tactics," Morrison observed as he pointed to several areas on the star map where enemy patrols had increased. War Prime Zethkar is personally leading punitive expeditions against any world where we've operated. He's implementing scorched earth policies that are killing thousands of innocent civilians. Dr. Chang looked up from her workstation where she was analyzing captured Krellian bioweapons. "I've been studying their latest chemical attacks on the colonies we liberated. The aliens are using weapons designed to target human genetic markers specifically. If we don't find countermeasures soon, they could wipe out entire populations." Morrison felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders as he realized the scope of what they were fighting against. The Krellian Empire controlled hundreds of worlds and had resources that humanity could never match in a direct military confrontation. Their only advantage was the willingness to fight, when surrender seemed logical, and the ability to adapt faster than their enemies expected. The communication array activated with an urgent message from Admiral Sullivan's fleet. Her face appeared on the main screen, looking tired and worried. "Jake, we've intercepted Krellian military communications that suggest they're planning something called Operation Final Silence. Our intelligence analysts believe it involves planet-killing weapons that could destroy every remaining human colony simultaneously." Morrison studied the fragments of intercepted alien communications that Sullivan transmitted to his command center. The Krellians were moving massive resources toward their homeworld of Zethmar Prime while increasing security around their most important military installations. Whatever they were planning would happen soon, and humanity needed to act before it was too late. "We need more than guerrilla raids and supply line attacks," Morrison told his assembled team leaders during their next strategy meeting. "The only way to stop Operation Final Silence is to strike at the heart of their command structure. We need to infiltrate Zethmar Prime and access their Central War Archive, where they store complete military databases." Rivera looked at Morrison with concern. "Jake, that's their homeworld protected by orbital defense platforms and millions of soldiers. Even if we could get past their security, the mission would be suicide for whoever attempts it." Morrison had already considered the risks and accepted them. "The alternative is watching every human colony get destroyed while we hide in caves and abandoned stations. I'm going to Zethmar Prime with a small team, and we're going to get the intelligence needed to stop their operation. Over the next 2 weeks, Morrison assembled his infiltration team while other resistance cells prepared diversionary attacks across the galaxy. Dr. Chang would accompany him to handle the computer systems while pilot Nancy Foster would operate their stolen Krellian stealth ship. Rivera wanted to come, but Morrison needed him to coordinate resistance activities while the mission was underway. The team spent days studying intelligence, reports about Zethmor Prime, and memorizing the layout of the capital city where the Central War Archive was located. They learned about Krelian security procedures and cultural customs that might help them blend in with the local population. Most importantly, they established contact with underground resistance fighters from the Ythtar species who had been conquered by the Krelians decades earlier. Morrison realized that the Krelian Empire was not as unified as it appeared from the outside. Several client species were growing restless under alien rule, and there were political fractures within the Krelian military hierarchy itself. These divisions could be exploited by a small team that understood how to move carefully through enemy territory. The stolen stealth ship had been modified with human technology that Dr. Chang developed from captured alien components. It could avoid most Krelian sensors but would only remain invisible for a limited time before the camouflage systems overloaded. They would have one chance to reach the planet's surface and complete their mission. Before enemy forces located them, Morrison's team launched from a hidden base in an asteroid field while Admiral Sullivan's fleet began coordinated attacks on Krelian outposts 3 systems away. The diversionary operations were designed to draw attention away from Zethmor Prime and give the infiltration team their best chance of success. The journey to the Krelian homeworld took 4 days through hyperspace routes that avoided the heaviest patrol areas. Morrison used this time to review every detail of the mission plan, while mentally preparing himself for what might be a one-way trip. He thought about the human colonies that were counting on them and the civilians who would die if Operation Final Silence succeeded. When they finally dropped out of hyperspace near Zethmor Prime, Morrison was amazed by the scale of the Krelian military presence. Thousands of warships patrolled the space around the planet, while massive orbital stations bristled with weapons pointed outward toward any potential threats. The planet itself was covered with cities and industrial complexes that stretched across entire continents. Beginning stealth approach, Nancy Foster reported as she activated the camouflage systems. We'll have about 6 hours before the modifications overload and we become visible to their sensors. Morrison watched the tactical display as they slipped past layer after layer of orbital defenses. Each minute brought them closer to the most dangerous mission any human had ever attempted, and he knew that failure would mean the end of everything they had fought to protect. The transport ship carrying Morrison and 15 other human prisoners shuddered as it moved through hyperspace toward the maximum security research station. Morrison had been waiting 6 months for this moment, and everything depended on the next few hours. He caught Dr. Chang's eye across the cargo hold and gave her a small nod that meant the plan was ready to begin. Morrison had spent weeks learning the Krelian computer systems during his medical examinations. Their technology was advanced, but they had designed it with their own logical thinking patterns in mind. They never expected a prisoner to understand their programming languages or security protocols. This overconfidence would be their downfall. When the ship dropped out of hyperspace, Morrison activated the hidden program he had been building in the medical computers. The virus spread through the transport systems like wildfire, causing navigation errors and weapon malfunctions. Emergency alarms began blaring as the Krelian crew realized they were losing control of their own vessel. "What is happening?" demanded the ship's captain as his bridge systems failed one by one. The artificial gravity fluctuated and several alien crew members were thrown against the walls. Morrison and the other prisoners used this confusion to break free from their restraints using tools that Dr. Chang had secretly modified during their captivity. The escape plan moved quickly from that point. Morrison led half the prisoners toward the ship's armory while Dr. Chang took the others to secure the engine room. The Krelian guards were well trained, but they had never faced humans who understood their tactics and technology. Morrison used their own weapons against them and disabled their communication systems to prevent them from calling for help. Fighting through the narrow corridors of the alien ship, Morrison remembered every lesson he had learned during his months of captivity. He knew how Krelian soldiers moved and thought, and he used this knowledge to predict their actions. The mechanical parts that had been grafted onto his body actually helped him fight better by giving him enhanced strength and speed. Dr. Chang's Group successfully took control of the engine room and began preparing the escape pods for launch. She had studied the ship's systems during her medical work and knew exactly which components to disable to prevent the Krellians from pursuing them. The enemy crew was trapped on a ship that was slowly falling apart around them. Morrison reached the bridge just as the ship's captain was trying to send a distress signal to the research station. A brief fight ended with Morrison in control of the navigation systems and the alien crew locked in their own detention cells. He programmed the escape pods to head for different locations to confuse any rescue attempts, then activated the ship's self-destruct sequence. The escape pods launched just minutes before the transport exploded in a brilliant flash of light. Morrison's pod contained Dr. Chang and 2 other prisoners, while the remaining survivors were scattered in different directions according to the plan. Each pod had enough supplies to reach the nearest habitable system, where they hoped to find other human resistance fighters. Morrison's pod crash landed on the surface of Kepler 442b, a contested world where intelligence reports suggested human guerrilla forces might be operating. The impact was rough, and Dr. Chang suffered injuries to her cybernetic arm, but they were all alive and free from Krellian captivity. The planet's atmosphere was breathable, and scans showed no immediate threats in the surrounding area. They had been walking across the rocky landscape for 2 days when Morrison heard the familiar sound of human voices calling out in English. A group of armed fighters emerged from behind a ridge, and Morrison recognized the lead figure as Commander Alex Rivera, his former first officer from the colony ship. Rivera had thought Morrison was dead, and his surprise was obvious when he saw his former captain walking toward him. "Jake?" Rivera called out in disbelief. "We saw the explosion at New Denver. How did you survive?" Rivera's team of 12 fighters looked tired and worn down from months of guerrilla warfare, but their spirits lifted when they realized who had just arrived on their planet. Morrison quickly explained what had happened during his captivity and escape, while Rivera filled him in on the resistance activities. The human fighters on Kepler 442b had been conducting hit-and-run attacks against Krellian mining operations, but they were severely outgunned and losing ground every week. They had managed to rescue some human civilians from captured colonies, but their supplies were running low. "We've been fighting like desperate animals," Rivera admitted as they walked toward the hidden base camp. "The Krellians have better weapons and more ships, and they seem to know our tactics before we use them. We need something that will change the balance of this war." Morrison smiled for the first time since his escape. "I think I can help with that, Alex. I spent 6 months learning everything about how they think and fight. Their biggest weakness is that they believe they understand us, but they don't understand us at all." Over the next few weeks, Morrison transformed Rivera's guerrilla cell from desperate survivors into an effective fighting force. He taught them to exploit Krellian overconfidence and rigid military thinking. Instead of attacking heavily defended targets, they began hitting supply convoys and communication stations. Instead of fighting pitched battles, they used mobility and surprise to strike. Where the enemy was weakest, the results were immediate and dramatic. Krellian casualties increased while human losses dropped to almost nothing. The aliens began making mistakes as they tried to adapt to tactics they had never encountered before. Morrison's understanding of their psychology allowed him to predict their responses and stay one step ahead of their countermeasures. News of Morrison's survival and the improved resistance performance spread through the hidden communication networks that connected scattered human groups across 3 star systems. Admiral Kate Sullivan made contact from her Mogul Fleet Command, and Morrison learned that coordinated resistance cells were now operating on over 20 different worlds. "Jake, we've been waiting for someone who could turn this war around," Sullivan told him during their encrypted communication session. "The Krellians are preparing something big, but we don't know what it is. We need a victory that will convince the neutral alien species to join us against the Empire." Morrison studied the intelligence reports that Sullivan transmitted and began developing a much larger plan than simple guerrilla raids. The war was about to enter a new phase, and humanity needed to prove that they could do more than just survive. Jake Morrison woke up slowly, like swimming up from the bottom of a dark ocean. His body felt wrong and heavy, and when he tried to move his arms, he heard mechanical sounds instead of muscle and bone. The room around him was filled with strange blue light, and the air smelled like chemicals and metal. He realized he was lying on some kind of medical table surrounded by alien technology he had never seen before. A tall creature entered the room, walking on 4 legs with 2 arms that ended in sharp claws. Its skin was gray and scaly, and its eyes glowed yellow in the dim light. Morrison recognized it as a Krellian from the intelligence reports he had studied before the war. This one wore symbols on its chest that marked it as someone important in their military structure. "The human awakens," the alien said in perfect English through a translation device attached to its throat. "I am War Prime Zethkar, commander of the Conquest fleet that destroyed your pathetic colony. You should have died in that explosion, but our medical technology has kept you alive for reasons you will soon understand." Morrison tried to speak, but his throat felt raw and damaged. When he finally managed to make sounds, his voice was rougher than before. "Why am I still alive?" he asked while trying to sit up on the medical table. The effort sent pain through his entire body, and he noticed that parts of his arms and legs had been replaced with mechanical components. "Because you interest me, human," Zethkar replied while moving closer to examine Morrison's cybernetic parts. "In 17 conquered star systems, we have never encountered a species that fought with such determination. Your resistance should have lasted hours, not days. Your sacrifice of an entire colony to damage our fleet shows a level of commitment that troubles my commanders." Morrison looked around the room and saw other medical tables with unconscious forms on them. One of them looked familiar, and he realized it was Dr. Lisa Chang from his crew. She appeared to be alive, but had similar mechanical modifications, too. "Her body? What did you do to my people?" he demanded while struggling against the restraints holding him to the table. "We study them," Zethkar answered without emotion. "Your species displays behavioral patterns that do not match our conquest models. We must understand how you think and fight before we can effectively eliminate the remaining human colonies scattered across the galaxy." Over the following weeks, Morrison learned the horrible truth about his situation. The Krellians had converted him into a living experiment to study human psychology and combat ability. They forced him to fight against captured creatures from other species they had conquered while recording every move and decision he made. They wanted to understand what made humans so difficult to defeat. Dr. Chang was awake during some of these sessions, and she secretly told him what she had learned about their captors. The Krellian Empire controlled hundreds of worlds and billions of alien creatures, but they ruled through fear rather than loyalty. Most of their subject species hated them and would rebel if they thought they had any chance of success. The survivors from New Denver scattered in different directions, Chang whispered to Morrison during one of their medical examinations. "Admiral Sullivan is still alive, and she's building a resistance network. Small human groups are attacking Krellian supply lines and outposts across 3 star systems. They're causing more damage than the aliens expected." Morrison stored this information carefully while enduring months of psychological torture. The Krellians tried every method they knew to break his spirit and make him cooperate with their research. They showed him recordings of human colonies being destroyed and claimed that resistance was hopeless. They offered him better treatment if he would teach them human military tactics and reveal the locations of hidden bases. But Morrison refused to give them anything useful. He answered their questions with lies and misdirection while secretly learning everything he could about Krellian technology and culture. He memorized the layout of their ships and the routines of their guards. He studied their language and customs through careful observation. Most importantly, he learned about their rigid military hierarchy and how their commanders thought about warfare. The Krellians began to see Morrison as both a valuable research subject and a growing threat. Some of their leaders wanted to execute him immediately, while others, led by Zethkar, believed he could provide crucial intelligence about human resistance capabilities. These disagreements created tension within their command structure that Morrison carefully noted. Dr. Chang continued her secret work, helping other human prisoners while pretending to cooperate with Krellian research projects. She had access to their medical facilities and used this position to gather information about alien weaknesses and technology. She also maintained hidden communication with some of the other conquered species who worked as slaves in the facility. Morrison realized that his best chance for escape would come during one of the prisoner transport operations that happened. Every few months, the Krellians regularly moved valuable subjects between different research stations, and security was always lighter during these transfers. He began planning carefully for an opportunity that might never come, the psychological. Testing continued as Zethkar became more frustrated with his inability to understand human motivation. "Your species makes no logical sense," the alien commander said during one of their conversations. "You sacrifice individuals for the group, but you also refuse to surrender even when defeat is certain. You show compassion for weakness, but you also display ruthless efficiency in combat. How can the same creature contain such contradictions?" Morrison smiled despite the pain from his latest medical procedure. "Maybe that's why you can't beat us," he replied. "You're looking for simple answers to complicated questions. Humans don't fit into your neat categories, and that's what makes us dangerous." Zethkar's yellow eyes glowed brighter with anger. "We will solve the puzzle of your species, human. And when we do, we will use that knowledge to eliminate every last colony and ship that bears your genetic signature. The galaxy will be cleaner without your chaotic influence." But Morrison could see doubt creeping into the alien commander's thoughts, and he knew that time was running out for both of them. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the colony ship, watching the massive alien fleet approach through the darkness of space. The green lights of their ship stretched across the starfield like angry eyes staring down at the human settlement below. He counted over 2,000 vessels moving in perfect formation toward New Denver Colony and knew this was the end of everything they had built here. "Admiral Kate," Sullivan's voice crackled through the communication system from the planet's surface, where she was organizing the evacuation. "Jake, we need more time. The civilian transports are still loading families from the outer districts. Can you give us another hour?" Morrison looked at the tactical display showing the enemy fleet closing in fast. The aliens called themselves the Krellian Empire, and they had already destroyed 17 other star systems that tried to resist them. Now they had come for humanity's last major colony in the Centauri system. His small crew of 40 volunteers had stayed behind to operate the colony's defenses while everyone else escaped to safety. "I'll give you whatever time I can, Kate," Morrison replied into his headset. He turned to his weapons officer, Lieutenant Ben Clark, who was preparing the orbital defense platforms. "How long before they reach firing range?" 20 minutes, sir." Clark answered while his fingers danced across the control panel. "The defense satellites are online, but they won't last long against that many ships." Morrison nodded and activated the colony-wide communication channel. His voice echoed through every building and tunnel of New Denver as families rushed toward the transport ships. "This is Captain Morrison. All civilians must reach the evacuation points immediately. We will hold the line as long as possible, but time is running short." Down on the planet's surface, thousands of people moved through the streets carrying whatever they could save from their homes. Children cried as their parents lifted them onto the crowded transport ships. Kate Sullivan directed the loading operations while checking her watch every few seconds. 3 more ships needed to launch before everyone would be safe. The first Krellian attack came without warning. Bright blue energy beams shot through space and struck the outer defense satellites. Morrison watched as 6 of his platforms exploded in brilliant flashes of light. The alien ships moved closer and began targeting the colony's shield generators on the planet below. "Return fire," Morrison ordered. The remaining defense platforms opened up with everything they had. Missiles and plasma beams reached out toward the enemy fleet, but the aliens had strong shields that absorbed most of the damage. Only a few smaller Krellian ships took any real hits before they adjusted their formation and continued their advance. Morrison's communication officer received an urgent message from the surface. "Sir, Admiral Sullivan reports that 2 transport ships have launched successfully, but the third is having engine problems. They need 15 more minutes to fix it." "We don't have 15 minutes," Morrison muttered as he watched more of his defense platforms being destroyed. The Krellians were now close enough that he could see the details of their warships. They looked like giant metal insects with multiple weapon arms extending from their hulls. The largest ship in the center had to be their command vessel. Morrison made a decision that would change everything. He turned to his crew and spoke in a calm voice that hid his fear. Everyone who wants to leave should take the emergency shuttles. Now, I'm staying to operate the main defense systems manually. That's the only way to buy enough time for the last transport. Most of his crew chose to stay with him. They had been together for 3 years protecting this colony, and they would not abandon their captain now. Lieutenant Clark remained at his weapons station while Dr. Lisa Shang continued monitoring the colony's power systems from the engineering deck. The battle became more intense as the Krellian fleet surrounded the planet. Morrison used every trick he had learned in 20 years of military service. He fired the defense platforms in coordinated patterns that forced the aliens to break formation. He redirected power from non-essential systems to boost the weapons and shields. When the fixed defenses were destroyed, he launched the colony's mining ships loaded with explosives at the enemy fleet. One by one, his weapons went silent as the aliens overwhelmed their positions. The colony's main shield began to fail under the constant bombardment. Morrison received the message he was waiting for from Kate Sullivan. "Jake, the last transport just cleared the atmosphere. Everyone is safe. Get out of there now." But Morrison looked at his tactical display and saw that the alien ships were already moving to intercept the fleeing transports. The only way to stop them was to do something desperate. He turned to the few crew members still alive on the bridge and gave them a direct order. "Evacuate to the emergency bunkers immediately." That's a direct order. As his people reluctantly left their stations, Morrison began the process of overloading the colony's main fusion reactor. The explosion would take out a large section of the alien fleet and give the transports time to escape to hyperspace. He worked quickly as Krellian ground forces landed near the command center and began fighting their way inside. The reactor reached critical levels. Just as alien soldiers broke down the bridge doors, Morrison smiled as he pressed the final activation button and everything went white.